All right, everyone, we start off today talking about Beijing Biden again. Of course, Biden is nuts. We know this. Of course, he's not really the one necessarily in charge of all policy, but I mean, the buck does stop there. He was honk duly elected to the presidency, so there's no one else to blame. You don't even necessarily know who's pulling his strings, but he's gone so far off the deep end that now he believes it's a good idea to raise federal taxes for the first time since 1993. There's a promise broken, by the way, on businesses and upper income earners and stuff. During an economic slump, we're arguably teetering on the edge of a recession. We're having problems economically. Now, the pandemic still rages. Lots of businesses are still hazarded and going under, and we've got a lot of more people on welfare, certainly, unemployment than we had a year ago. You know what we're going to do? We'll raise taxes. That'll solve the problem. This is part of his plan to pay for his so-called stimulus, only 10% of which has anything to do with COVID. Now, first and foremost, before we delve into deriding Biden, there will be a pinned comment if you're watching this video on YouTube. Keep in mind, only 2 videos a day are on YouTube. 2 other videos are exclusive just to these other sites, the 4 that are linked in the description as well as in a pinned comment. I do that to incentivize people to use other platforms because at this point YouTube persists in abusing its users, algorithmically demoting them, randomly banning them. It becomes tiresome. It's like, why put all your effort into a site that could randomly ban you because they just don't like you one day? It seems to be the case with many creators, especially those involved with news and politics. 2 of the main things that I cover, so it becomes a little bit worrisome. Anyway, the idea of raising any taxes during an economic slump is nuts. You would be better off, and I don't support this either, but from an economic standpoint, you would arguably be better off just printing the fucking money and inflating the currency, because the bulk of currency is so large that if you did it by the amount needed to cover the extra part of the stimulus that won't be recouped at the end of the year in extra spending, it would affect the economy considerably less. The problem with the Democrats' constant harping about, don't worry, we're only raising taxes on big corporations, which won't happen, I'll explain that too, through business taxes and on upper income earners. The problem is that trickles down to literally everyone else. The real trickle down has nothing to do with, we slashed taxes for the rich and expected it to get to the poor. That was never even a proposal in the Ronald Reagan era. The term trickle down was always just a canard. It was never real. There was never any such proposal made by the Republican Party. The real trickle down is the attempt constantly by Democrats to say, if we just take money from the rich, the government will be Robin Hood now, instead of being the sheriff of Nottingham. We're going to take money from the rich, from those evil rich people that have more than you, so you should dislike them. It's very divisive, and give it to you. Now, does this happen? No. If you raise the business tax rate, you will fuck small and regional businesses. You will also potentially fuck the self-employed. People like us. People who create content on the internet fall under that broad umbrella that'll be targeted. It'll affect the upper middle class, because they're small business owners that usually fit into that economic rung, at least on paper. It'll fuck the working rich. So someone, dentist, retired to a private clinic in order to pursue things in their own garage. They convert it into a dentist office, and then they work for themselves. They make their own schedule. They probably have an employee maybe, and they're happy that way usually because they don't have to take marching orders from a hospital. Someone like, let's say someone opens up a funeral home. Now they get a couple employees embalming corpses and stuff, again, in their garage, which some people do. Small business owners, entrepreneurs, not the super wealthy, not Jeff Bezos. Do you think in a million years that Congress would ever vote through a new tax code change to the federal tax rate? Whether Biden would insist on this or not, including many Democrats, this would become a problem. Do you believe that they will vote through any form of tax proposal that increases taxes on their main billionaire donors? No, they never have, and they never will. If they ever did, the money would be offshored, draining the coffers of the United States further. It would hurt the lower class. It would hurt the middle class. You're not going to be able, with the current structure of our government, to go after that billionaire cash. It's just impossible. If you want to balance the budget, you have to reduce spending. That's the only thing that you can do. There is so much bloat, so much waste in government that could be cut, except that it was all put there by people in Congress who are basically doing that because a military firm set up shop in their state, and that military firm gave them $500,000 for their campaign. Because some lobby, the coal lobby talked to them. Their state is big in coal, like hundreds of thousands of jobs, and they show up with dudes in hard hats, and they all party and have a couple lagers, and so they put more pork in a budget bill. The problem is greed. Well, greed can't be eliminated by this kind of plan. During a recession is not the time to raise taxes. This shows the ineptitude, the economic turmoil, really, within the Biden administration. Now, with Janet Yellen back on board, I'm not the least bit surprised. This is insane. What you'll end up doing, if this proposal actually goes through, and again, it's not entirely sure that it will, if this proposal goes through and they raise the federal tax rate, it will drag up the lower brackets. That's the first guarantee. It'll drag the lower brackets up. You will pay a higher federal tax. But that's inevitable anyway as the Trump tax cuts expire. So keep in mind, Biden will use the plausible deniability thing and say, well, man, that was Trump's doing. He wrote it into the law. It will be conspicuously absent from MSM coverage, by the way, on that actually that was written in by the Republicans and by Trump to get the Democrats to vote for it because they didn't want to have to bypass them and didn't have the votes to do so. The Democrats are the ones that caused that cutoff point for many of the deductions to be passed. But anyway, if this passes, not only will that occur, and you'll pay a marginally higher tax rate, especially if you're self-employed or have kids and that deduction goes away, not only will you be paying more that way, if you're in the working middle, upper middle class, anywhere in that 90% of the population that's neither severely destitute nor very, very rich, you'll also have your federal tax rate upped in the de facto sense, simply by a rise in the cost of living. If you actually go after that billionaire money, the poor are not going to get it. The poor, it's just like the minimum wage fight. Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Now people who are making $16 or $17 an hour, in certain parts of the country that's pretty good. You know, in fucking rural West Virginia, $16 an hour is reasonable. Now all of a sudden, they're smashed down. You haven't uplifted anyone. The people making $15 an hour are still the lowest class of society. You've given them marginally more purchasing power. Every 10th one of them is now unemployed. And really, the cost of living just rises. The rent goes up. Well, why is the rent higher? I can't imagine why. Could it be because we've raised the cost of literally every aspect of life? I don't understand. Goods and services are 20% more expensive than they used to be. We need to give more money to these poor people. More government won't solve the problem. If it was, then the war on poverty by now, 50 fucking years later, I would assume would have had some positive impact. Well, it hasn't. Private marketplaces have. Look at, for instance, the cost of goods. Generally speaking, the cost of virtually every good in the world is higher now than it was 20 years ago. There are a couple of exceptions, though. Tech. Computers. How much did a laptop cost you 20 years ago? How much did a laptop cost? Way more than it does today. $2,000 for an upper mid-end laptop. Oh, shit, you can get it for $1,000 now. The cost is, as an absolute number, while the value of the currency has been dropping like a rock, the absolute value of these things has either been stable or dropped. In many cases, the cost of some of the peripherals that people use today in computing were very expensive like 10, 15, 20 years ago, and now are peanuts. You know, people they buy them by the bushel. That's because in tech, you've had, well, number one, you've had subsidies in California, but we'll get past that. Generally, you've had a much more free market. Much more innovation has been done. A very privatized internet has led to a lot of advances that other industries simply don't have because the buy-in is so massive. It's different from the other industries. The internet was, until fairly recently, virtually untaxed and unregulated. That's why the cost dropped. Isn't that wonderful? And many rich people exist now because of tech advancements in the private marketplace. Now that's beginning, unfortunately, to stagnate. You can look for higher prices there in the future, too, which is why crypto and alt tech are such great things. Which is why people are investing in firms outside of the United States. It's asinine. Raising the federal tax rate at all is a bad idea in general. Raising it during this particular economic time, I would say, is just shy of fucking lunacy. That's about all. Peace out.